Joined now by NHL insider from the Daily Faceoff and the Frankly Speaking podcast, Mr. Frank Seravalli. How we doing? How busy are you these days?
Oh, I'm busy. This is silly season where you're just chasing nonsense. Like you'd be shocked at how things sort of like even the most innocuous tip, like you get a call from someone who knows someone that's like, hey, Dustin Wolf from the Flames, he's flying to Newark today. He's on my friend's flight. So then like you need to quick hurry up and call people and you're like, are the Flames trading Markstrom? What's happening here? And then you find out that Dan Vladar just tweaked something and they're calling him up for insurance. And you're like, gee, thanks for the half-hour runaround.
We had the same thing this morning. Blake went, oh my God, Flames only have an e-bug on the ice. What's happening? Nothing, apparently.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And it's just a time suck sometimes. But that's part of the deal. And you know what? Gig. And I would say, too, you never know where stuff comes from. So I do not bat an eye at the weirdest source you've ever heard. People know stuff. And however it gets to you, it doesn't really matter. It just has to be correct.
I remember Blake and I were doing a show years ago in the summer, like an innocuous June or July day outside of BC Place. And we got a cryptic text in the inbox that just said, guys, I think Trevor Linden's being fired right now. Or has it just been fired? And sure enough, it turned out to be true, like within an hour or so. Okay, let's move on. Phil Kessel. Are the Canucks going to sign Phil Kessel, Frank?
I don't know. It's been a long time since Phil Kessel's played, and obviously he's remained training and kept hope alive. I think the big thing that's connected to it is the Rick Tocchet connection, right? He's the Phil Kessel whisperer and the person who really seemed to get him more than any other coach and get him engaged. I have real questions at this point how productive Phil Kessel could be. And it's not like we've got a pretty big sample size, right? You know, I know that he's hungry to play and the passion is there, but when you go a stretch where Vegas decides that for 20 games in the playoffs, their roster is better off without you in it, that I think to me, it's a real long shot, even if he does come in, for him to be a significant contributor.
Explain Rasmus Ristolainen to us. 3 more years at $5.1 million, and yet to listen to some, the Canucks, the Stars, and others are interested in Ristolainen, who
do not understand.
Consistently tracks as one of the worst defensemen by the analytics. But yeah, Dallas, Toronto, Vancouver, and Ristolainen. What's up there?
Does not compute. I think the Flyers would love to try and find a way to move on. I think he's enjoyed a bit of a renaissance under John Tortorella, but I think everyone understands that contract, as currently constituted, doesn't really make a lot of sense for the Flyers. How do they facilitate that? Can they find a way to reduce the salary to the point where it is palatable for other teams? There's opportunity cost involved if the Flyers were to do that. Like, think about the players that they're already retaining on in Kevin Hayes. That's already for 2 additional years. If you were to chew up another one for a couple years in Ristolainen, that doesn't leave you a ton of flexibility after the fact. That trade for Ristolainen will go down as one of the worst that we've seen in the last 10 years, getting him from Buffalo for Chuck Fletcher. It didn't make sense then. He didn't play well, and then they felt pot committed based on what that they had given up, that they felt like they had to re-sign this guy to a deal of that magnitude, and it does not make sense.
Where are the Flyers on any of these players? We've talked about Walker and Sealer and others. I mean, they played more games than anybody, and they're still 3 points back of that wild card spot. Although the wild card spot may not be the best, or they're 3 points back of the Hurricanes at the very least. When do they decide what their fate is this season, do you think?
Oh, they know what their fate is this season. If they get in, great. But John Tortorella gave everyone the warning shot 2 to 3 weeks ago. And he said, we're going to make some trades that people here aren't going to be happy with, meaning that they've played their butts off this year. And yet it's not really about this year. It's big picture. And this
Mhm.
is a team that entered the season rebuilding. They've defied expectations and at times logic. Even the way this week has unfolded, you go into Florida right on the other side of the break where you sort of slid into it. The team goes on a bender in the Caribbean and they come back and they beat the Panthers in Florida. Like what? One of the best teams in the East. And then they shellacked the Jets last night. And you're like, well, how is this happening?
Mhm.
But they've got the long view in mind. And I think it's very, very likely that they move Walker. Sealer he's kind of a wait and see. If they get something that really gets them excited, they'll move him, but they've continued contract extension talks and it's been pretty positive there to the point where I think they're supposed to revisit it in 2 weeks and they're hoping to keep him. Mostly because what are you going to get for him that exceeds what he brings to the table for you? And so that's sort of where they're at up front. They're just entertaining lots of different stuff. Scott Lawton, whatever comes across their plate that makes sense is what they'll do.
What about Konechny?
Great question. I certainly don't think they're trying to move him. And I think if anything, what makes more sense to me is to wait until the summer when you can have, 15 other teams that are in the mix as opposed to just the contenders now. I think his value between now and the summer isn't going to change all that much. Yes, one additional playoff run would be nice, but I can't see cutting off half the market in order to try and pull the trigger now. It feels like one of those trades that if it happens, really needs to be sussed out and really go through a process to capitalize and maximize their return.
Moving from Calgary's crease to their blue line, Tanev leaves the game twice and returns. They win again, and I see Hanifin has risen to the top of your trade targets board. Did anything that has happened since the break where Calgary's been good with a couple of wins, including our buddy Kuzmenko? Is anything like that affecting Conroy? Does he think he's still in it? Does he get scared by what he saw from Tanev last night?
Well, those are a whole bunch of different questions. I'll start with Tanev. Your heart has to skip a beat. And I know that, he goes down the tunnel so often, it's pretty normal to see him return 30 seconds later. But the way he plays as a human missile, like I would think long and hard if I were in the Flames' shoes about asset protection at this point. Like, I think the last thing you want is to be left holding the bag. And I don't think the Flames are that far off from obviously, just 2 run-ins in one game. You want to make sure you keep him clean to move him. And whether, that's now or whether it's 3 weeks from now, I don't think they're very far off from having to pull him from the lineup. When it comes to the team overall and their thought process, consider the pieces they've already taken off of this team, Zadorov and now Lindholm, and they're still competitive. Are things really going to change that much if they move Tanev?
Right.
Then the Hanifin part of this is until he puts pen to paper, he's going to remain the number 1 guy on our board. And I know they're waiting an answer. I believe they were supposed to meet either yesterday or today with Hanifin's representatives to really talk this through and to try and get an answer. But he's gotten cold feet. He's left them at the end of the aisle. You've given him everything he wants. It certainly feels to me right at this exact juncture that they would have to be thinking without an answer, we need to move him. But until that happens, he's going to stay there.
I, as you know, last week allowed you to bow on Sean Monahan. And so I preface this by saying, Frank, I trust you. When you tell me a centerman is going to go for a first-round pick, I'm buying you.
Okay.
Nick Dowd.
First-round pick. I'll
bet you.
This might not be to my advantage.
The former Vancouver Canuck cast-off, who, to be fair, immediately started playing well in Washington as soon as he left here. Explain to me how he gets a first-round pick.
Term. It's the extra year on his deal at a nothing contract. And the reactions to people, when I said that on my podcast, they were, you could hear people's heads rolling almost. But there's been that much interest teams love him. And for a late first to get in, just think of the guys that Tampa traded for at the time that we were like a late first for Barkley. Like that's the type of addition this guy is. And
he's 33. Like I agree. Like if he was 29, absolutely. He's 33.
He doesn't show any signs of slowing down to me. There's not a ton of wear on that tread. I don't know about you. Like I sign me up with Nick Dowd. And look, I will do this. And you don't have to take me up on it, and it may not work to my advantage. Because of the differential in real estate between where I live and where you live. But I would bet you a mortgage payment that he gets a first.
Yeah, it is very different. Yeah. You don't want my mortgage payment. I assure you.
I bet Ryan Pinder on Barn Burner that Monahan would get a first. He didn't take the bet, but I made the same offer.
Yeah,
I'm a renter, Frank. You should see rents in this market.
I don't want to. Yeah. The only thing I would have going for me in that case is the currency conversion.
That's right. The conversion.
Is Tampa competition for a lot of these defensemen now that Sergachev's gone?
Yeah, I think they were in the market for depth defensemen anyway, but now with Sergachev, the injury has really thrown a wrench into their season, quite frankly. It's not just, we can get in, but can we compete? And how aggressive will we be? That remains to be seen. The thing from Julien Brisebois' playbook that we can draw on is the last few deadlines when he's been aggressive, which is every time, he's traded his firsts for players that he can retain, whether it's been Nick Paul or Brandon Hagel or Tanner Jeannot. Like he's found a way to keep all those guys. And if he's going to go down that path again and be aggressive for a team that doesn't have very many assets, I'm skeptical that he will be, especially after the Sergachev injury, but defense is certainly the position to do it.
You talked about Alex Carrier today. Where does he land in this whole mix? Is he in a Sean Walker comparison in terms of the same kind of teams that are looking for him?
Yep. I think he's maybe a slight step down from Sean Walker, who I think has just a touch more size and better skating ability. But, to me, when talking about Carrier, he's the perfect kind of fit for Tampa that I could envision. Someone that you can improve your team without going over the top and spending crazy. And someone that if you wanted to bring back and re-sign, there's certainly a path for you to do so. And so I think he's one of those sneaky, quiet deadline additions that can really help a team that isn't going to break the bank. And there's not one facet of his game that's going to knock you over. He's not super skilled. He's not flashy. I said in the piece, there's not a lot of sizzle, but there's certainly substance. And he's someone that he shows up to work every night, which is more than you can say for a lot of guys.
From one typically aggressive team in Tampa, I want to spend a minute on Vegas. They had 3 different people scouting that Jersey Calgary game last night. Do you think they'd be in on Tanev and Hanifin? Because the one thing McCrimmon has showed is they take the big swing.
Oh, yeah.
Typically. Are we going to see another big swing from Vegas here, Frank?
I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, they're in a window to win. Aiden Hill, look at his numbers since coming back, has been lights out. And I think when you look at their defense core, when Theodore's healthy, they've got some elite pieces, but they've also got some guys, further down their depth chart that are some are replacement level and some are like an Alec Martinez, an unreal shot blocker is long in the tooth. So there's room to improve and upgrade. I don't see a big fit up front, although you look at last year and the impact that someone like Barbashev had. Last year they didn't spend a first round pick. They didn't go wild to improve their team, but I could see them this year being that team that, dives in to support where they're at. I mean, look at the collision course that they're on. It's very likely to be Vegas and Edmonton in the first round. Not only will that be a bloodbath, but it's a it's legitimately a coin flip.
Mm-hmm. And that brings me to something that we've started kicking around this week, Frank, and that is potentially an arms race here in the Pacific. That does Vancouver have to look at adding another guy, not just to improve their team, but to keep them away from Vegas or Edmonton, if we're talking about those three shopping in the same aisle here?
You mean in terms of keep them away in the bracket?
No, in terms of if Edmonton's hot to trot on Tanev, can you make a Tanev deal that not only helps your club, but of course keeps them away from an Edmonton or a Vegas?
Yeah, I mean, I always think that's a potential or part of it. I think that's also how you can lose yourself a bit, where
sure, big risk.
You spend more time focusing on what other teams may be doing instead of what really helps your team. And not to say Tanev wouldn't. It's just that I've been saying, and I've been consistent for weeks now, yes, the forward component, huge. I love that the Canucks went out and got their guy. They got the guy that they wanted on the market. Now, when it comes to defense, I think they can use one more body, but I also don't know that I think a lot of these guys might be interchangeable, and it might not be the biggest splash that makes the most impact.
Well, it should be fun. I'm looking forward to this. This is the first time, Frank, we're talking about the Canucks being a buyer since 5 years in the Toffoli trade. And even then it was kind of
hope and prayer.
Yeah. First time we've seen this team, have a chance to add guys with a contender.
Fine tuning to contenders a different.
Yeah. It's a totally different beast than let's get in and let's add a guy to hope to make sure we get in.
That's the most exciting part, though, is that has been Jim Rutherford's specialty. It hasn't necessarily been in turning things around, but they've done that.
Yeah.
But now he's had the golden touch on a number of teams now at the deadline to find that missing piece. And the other part that I love about him, and I've mentioned before, if it doesn't work, he moves on. And that is so big, admitting mistakes. He's good at it.
Yeah, the previous group, not so much.
Yeah. And well, on that vein, have you heard Mikheyev's name at all?
I have not.
Okay. Because he's not working out right now, but that may well be injury related coming back off the ACL. Great stuff, Frank. Thanks for this. We'll catch up next Friday.
Thanks, guys. Have a good weekend.